The Devil's Footsteps Incident by Shrouded Hand. I'm ready for this. I don't know what this is.
Hello everybody, Shrouded Hand here. Today we're going to cover a story which has fascinated me for years. A sinister, unsolved mystery from England's past. So let's jump in. The winter of 1854 to 55 was exceptionally harsh in Britain. It was one of the coldest ever recorded. Much of the country lay beneath a thick blanket of snow which brought daily life to a standstill, isolated remote villages and caused widespread suffering. The 9th of February 1955 began like any other day that winter. Following another freezing night, the inhabitants of various villages in Devon, southwest England, awoke to assess the extent of the snowfall, but when they opened their doors they were greeted by a very unsettling sight. In Topsham, Lipstone, Exmouth, Teignmouth, Dawlish, and in fact across more than 30 separate locations throughout Devon and even into parts of Dorset, a set of footprints, or rather hoof prints, were seen in the snow.
Okay.
Now, these were fairly rural communities, so the sights of animal tracks in the snow wouldn't usually cause such alarm, but there was something distinctly off about these prints. The footprints were said to resemble the tracks of a donkey, but not a donkey walking on four legs. Rather, the prints appeared in single file, as if the creature had been hopping on one leg. Disturbingly, the tracks seemed to approach the front doors of numerous houses, as if whatever had made them had attempted to enter the homes before retreating and moving on to the next house. There was scarcely a garden in any of these villages that didn't bear the prints of this mysterious nocturnal visitor.
Okay.
More unsettling still, these footprints appeared to defy logic. In some places, the footprints appeared to go up to the base of a building, and then the footsteps could be seen crossing the rooftop. It was as if the creature had walked up the wall, across the roofs, and down the other side.
That's interesting. Like, yeah, my immediate thought of, oh, well, animal prints, 1850s, right? Not necessarily, sure, we had the Industrial Revolution in full swing, right? We've had that, but like, rural communities, sure, animals. But then it's like, no, it was just a single set. Or it was in single file. It's like, okay, that's a strange one. But then you get into it looks like it went house to house, door to door, and even sometimes on the roofs. Yeah, that's a brain teaser.
In other places, the footprints appeared to pass through thick hedges and hay bales, or even to walk across the top of narrow walls. The tracks also appeared to cross directly over the River Exe, which, although it was partially frozen, certainly wouldn't have supported the weight of a one-legged donkey. Things got even stranger when they decided to follow the tracks. It was discovered that the footprints formed a single continuous trail between each village, and it had travelled an insane distance. The straight line distance covered by the footprints was estimated at around 40 miles, but the winding and meandering nature of its path suggested that the creature had travelled closer to 100 miles, all in a single night.
This reads to me like a prank in some aspects, like a very elaborate one. That's a hard one. That's a little bit of a brain teaser. I need a little more to formulate thoughts.
Riots quickly grew among the villagers, and it was then that a number of men got together, armed themselves with guns, and took a pack of hounds to try and track the footprints to the source. They were hoping to trap or kill whatever had made them. According to some accounts, the men traced the footprints to a dark forest, and they sent their hounds into it to investigate. Moments later, the dogs ran back out, howling in terror, and they refused to re-enter the woods. Closer inspection of the footprints revealed some unsettling details. Some observers claimed that the tracks appeared to be melted into the snow as if burned by an intense heat. Others noted with alarm that some of the prints were distinctly cloven or that they had claw marks within them. Word quickly spread among the other villagers. The devil himself had been visiting their houses. Pretty soon, the villagers were too terrified to leave their houses at night lest they encounter whatever had made those footprints wandering through their gardens.
I mean, obviously, you get to a certain point where the thing is unexplained, therefore it is magic, it is witchcraft, it is demonic, etc., right? Like, I mean, we've seen this throughout history. That in itself is not a bizarre conclusion to draw, right? This does draw, parallels to certain other, I guess, paranormal situations and or stories you hear, right, of, animals, because animals have senses beyond our own, more fine-tuned senses. They're able to react to certain things which we may not see, or they're able to, react to things in advance. I mean, there's a few things going on there. It's hard to really pin one thing down. Yeah, and the prank angle, I mean, just it would have had to be a very coordinated and very elaborate prank, especially the up walls and stuff. I mean, this does share similarities, at least in part, with somewhat Skinwalker stories that you hear about, where, they're walking around the house, trying to get in, tapping at windows. You hearing it from the outside, then you hear it, on the roof, right? I mean, that's a very, at least pop culture Skinwalker story thing to do, right? So, I mean, it kind of shares that similarity. Because it's 1850s England, I could see the angle of, it being demonic, it being the devil. I could see this being a conclusion that people would draw. But that also begs... Okay, so if this is the conclusion people would draw, would somebody not try to fabricate this, or at the very least try to do this, right? Like, they know what the response would be.
This panic became so bad that on the following Sunday, the Reverend Musgrave addressed his parishioners from his church. He reassured them that although Satan may cross our paths, he leaves no earthly trace. Therefore, the footprints must have a natural explanation. He then suggested that an escaped kangaroo was responsible for the footprints.
Yes.
Whilst this may sound outlandish,
I agree. England is definitely blaming the Australians. That's clearly a joke. That's a weird one. That feels like a little bit of a stretch, especially because of the history between Australia being a British penal colony. I mean, I guess happenstance, right? Kangaroo. And I don't know. That's such a strange one.
Kangaroos were indeed kept in nearby menageries, although none of them had reported any escapes at the time. Reverend Musgrave later admitted he'd fabricated the entire kangaroo story just to try and calm the villagers' fears.
Yeah, as one would do.
So if it wasn't an escaped kangaroo, then what was it? Well, once the newspapers got hold of the story, all sorts of explanations were offered. A notable biologist named Richard Owen studied the prints, and he claimed that they'd been made by a badger, driven by the cold weather to forage in people's gardens.
It was in fact the Russian badger. He got some new Jordans.
He claimed that the thawing and refreezing of the snow could have deformed the prints, making them appear larger. Although looking at pictures of badger prints in the snow, it's hard to see how they could be mistaken for hoof prints, and they definitely don't move in single file like the ones reported. A similarly unlikely explanation was that they were made by a large seabird, and this would explain how the footprints appeared on rooftops and other unlikely places, but again, it's hard to see how a bird's feet could leave a hoof-like imprint in the snow.
Yeah.
A letter to one paper claimed that a man had discovered very similar prints in his own garden in Torquay. He followed the prints to the source and found that they'd been made by a large toad. Other suggestions included that the prints were made by cats, otters, rats, or even an escaped monkey.
I don't know what's the more terrifying thought, though, unironically. Is it a more terrifying thought to have, I don't know, whatever, like literal demons, Satan, whatever, walking around? Or is it a more terrifying thought to have a one-legged donkey hopping around, especially with like, how would that work? Like how would this thing pogo stick from house to house to house, and even up on the roof, 100 miles? How does? I think that's the more terrifying thing here. I think that's the more like horrifying concept here.
What does seem evident from all the newspaper reports that I collected is how eager they are to try and hand-wave the incident away as superstitious rantings of a bunch of country bumpkins. This doesn't sit right with me. These would have been country folk who were likely very well acquainted with animal footprints.
Right.
If they were likely to freak out every time a cat ran across their roof, then we would have stories like this every time it snowed. This was definitely something out of the ordinary.
Right.
I'm not saying it was the devil, but whatever happened was certainly strange enough to unsettle people who were deeply familiar with their natural surroundings. Yet the enlightened newspaper writers of 1855 quickly debunked the phenomenon. It didn't.
I mean, so here's the thing, right? Here's you go to your job, right? Let's say you work with heavy machinery, right? And it's like, well, yeah, that machine, every 30 minutes or so, because it's held together with spit, WD-40, duct tape, and some zip ties, and a little bit of a prayer every time you walk by it, right? Yeah, every 30 minutes, you just hear it chug. But then it's like, I don't know, you get to work one day, and it's like, this is chugging like every 5 minutes. Like this machine feels like it's about to be the cause of a safety meeting. And maybe some workman's comp. Or you show up to, I don't know, your favorite hiking trail, and you've hiked this thing, dozens of times, but then, that one specific day, it just doesn't feel right. There's no bird singing, there's no animal noise. It's all just quiet, right? Like, it's one of those things that you think of and you're just like, because you're familiar with the environment, right? In both of these cases, and in this, these quote unquote country bumpkins, them country folk, right? They're around animals, are they not? Yes, they're used to a horse, they're used to a mule, they're used to, insert animal here, right? If there was a horse walking around every winter, I mean, you probably would have heard about it before this, right? So if this especially breaks tradition, if this breaks precedent, if this is something genuinely new, that's when you hear about it, right? And thus leading into, as well, if you want to play the quote-unquote and pun intended devil's advocate, would something like this potentially draw up enough interest in the area that could probably bring in some tourism dollars, or I guess euros, right? Or whatever they were using at that point in time, right? Like, I mean, you could see both sides of it, though, right? Like, in both of these conclusions we've drawn, and that Shrouded Hand has drawn, these are people who clearly know the area. They clearly know how to be around animals. They clearly know that this is a little different, right? There is that base level acknowledgement. Now, from a mass public appeal side of things, and to make sure that, suddenly you don't have an entire country trying to be like, whoa, we need to, we might need to get that third crusade against some farm animals going, or whatever crusade we're on at this point, right? There's going to be things that come out in regards to like, oh, this is just a kangaroo, or we're debunking it's just them country folk, right? Because mass hysteria, mass panic is a very real thing.
It really mattered that they all had different explanations, or that none of their explanations fully accounted for the entirety of the phenomena. To them, they'd done enough to call it case closed, and then they could have a little laugh at the simple country folk. One way of tying up all of these different explanations is the idea that it might not have been a single creature at all. Sure. This is somewhat plausible. It would explain why the tracks were able to cover up to 100 miles in a few hours, and why they appeared in such different places. After all, even the witnesses reported different shaped footprints. Some saw a horseshoe shape, others saw a cloven hoof, some saw claws. Eyewitness drawings of the prints do show some variation, but they do appear to be deformations of the same basic shape, probably caused by the snow melting and refreezing.
Yeah, at that point you do have variance, but variance that could reasonably be explained by environmental factors, right?
In this illustration, you can see how the horseshoe shape can appear in some places to be a cloven hoof before reforming into the horseshoe.
Right.
The phenomenon was carefully documented by various people, and what does seem consistent is the size of the prints and the distance between them. In most reports, they're 4 by 3 inches in size, and there's a distance of about 8 inches between each footstep.
So I know this is converting it for sake of the video, but the obvious commentary that comes to mind is the scariest part here is that the English, they were using the imperial system. They were using inches. Obviously, I'm assuming this is done in like millimeters or something metric. Obviously, I'm pretty sure this is just like conversion for the sake of like YouTube viewership.
One of the more convincing explanations is that the tracks could have been made by a small rodent such as a field mouse.
Rat!
When travelling over snow, the rodent will hop from place to place, leaving a body-sized indentation that can look like a hoof print, especially when the snow melts a bit. This could explain why it appeared to move in a single file, jumping forward like that, and maybe why it was able to cross the roofs of houses, assuming a mouse was able to scale a drain pipe.
Dude, that mouse was on a mission, okay? That mouse, that was the Great Journey, okay? We're talking Halo, the Great Journey. That's the Great Journey. Mouse goes 100 miles.
Given the amount of footprints and the distance that they travelled, this would mean that hundreds of mice were involved, and this doesn't explain why the tracks appear to form one continuous path. I guess there's always the possibility that they were mistaken about this. Maybe the crisscrossing of multiple mouse tracks gave the appearance of a single continuous trail. Still though, we go back to the idea that these were country folk and they probably would have seen mouse tracks before, so why did it cause such alarm? There's also the theory that the footprints could have been a hoax. In Mike Dash's paper, The Devil's Hoof Marks, he tells of an incident that occurred a month earlier in Wolverhampton. In January 1855, cloven hoof marks similar to those of a deer were found on the vertical walls and roofs of a number of pubs, starting at the Cross at Old Hill in Rowley Regis. Elizabeth Brown, landlady of the Lion Pub, suggested a supernatural explanation for the mystery. Since the Rowley hoof marks appeared nowhere but on the walls and roofs of pubs, however, it seems at least likely that the marks were made by local chapel ranters who wanted to make a point about the pernicious effects of alcohol.
I think that inherently becomes, right here, the reason it becomes so hard to discuss certain things, because immediately, like, you hear a noise go bump in the night, right? You hear something that shouldn't be there, something that you're not used to, and immediately it's, oh, this is paranormal, this is a ghosty, this is spooky, right? And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not going to sit here and be some buzzkill. I'm not going to sit here and necessarily be some, oh, there's nothing here, right? It's all in your head, right? There's some weird stuff, right? Having good faith conversations, hearing about good faith accounts, and knowing that there's people, who want to give good faith, testimony. Like, there's some weird stuff that happens. There's also the perspective, sure, that magic is just science that we haven't understood yet or haven't figured out yet. Sure, I can agree to that in a lot of aspects. But like, you need to make sure that you're actually going through the steps, right? Like, you need to start from the top and you need to work in sequence, right? It's no different than rulings in games or trying to stack buffs or stack mods in Warframes. Like, how do you work through this sequentially to figure out what this is, right? Well, there's some weird deer tracks up on there, right? Is there some, could it be, hooves? When did we find these? How many was it on? Is it only on bars? Well, if it's only on bars, clearly we're having a pattern here. Maybe this could be someone pulling a prank with commentary in regards to the pernicious effects of alcohol, right? Like, you see how we can work through that, like, in sequence, we can break it down and then work to it. But eventually, if it's like, yeah, like, I've looked at this is clearly in good faith, everything else checks out, sure, I'm willing to believe that there is something here that, is unexplainable for the most part, right? I think it's an interesting logic trained to go through, right? Like going through things in sequence. And I think that more people need to have the ability for both the common sense and the critical thinking in order for discussions like this to really happen.
Possible then that the Devon hoofprints were the work of certain religious Puritans out to put the fear of the devil into people.
It's entirely
Mike Dash's
possible.
paper also mentions a book that suggests that the prints may have been the work of Romany gypsies. In Manfred Wood's book, In the Life of a Romany Gypsy, he describes how 7 Romany tribes, using 400 specially constructed stepladder stilts, laid down a continuous trail of devil's footprints that crossed over walls, hedges, and the roofs of houses.
Yes, of course. And I do mean this in the context of acknowledging the video, right? Like, not... I don't know. The funny G word is a little problematic from what I understand. Maybe I'm not going to repeat it. That being said, obviously this is done in the, means of like, this is like relaying what is being said, like historically, like this is the historical documentation, right? So it's a little different, right? But it's just like, yeah, sure, just blame this group of people that seems to always get blamed. Yes, because that definitely always works out well, and there's definitely no malicious intent or no fear of the unknown there, right? Just blame this specific group, because that definitely has never happened in history.
According to him, this was done to scare away rival traveller gangs who were staking claim to the area, but it had the unintended consequence of putting the fear of God into the locals. He says that this story was told to him by an uncle. He doesn't give a specific date for the events, and he says that the footsteps traced a straight line across Somerset rather than meandering around several villages in Devon. It's very possible that he's misremembering details or that the whole thing is just made up, but it's an interesting story. Personally though, I don't see how humans could pull this off, whether it was a bunch of religious fanatics or a tribe of Romany gypsies on stepladders. It seems impossible to me that you could climb about over the tops of people's houses in the dead of winter in a very quiet part of the country without anybody seeing or hearing you.
Anybody waking up, yeah.
It's probably more believable than the devil doing it, but only slightly. The author Geoffrey Household, in his book The Devil's Footprints, has another theory. Apparently, a local man named Major Carter told him that his grandfather had worked at Devonport at the time of the incident. That night, an experimental balloon had escaped from Devonport. The balloon had a rope dangling below it with 2 weights on the end. He claims that the footprints were caused by this balloon bobbing along, dragging the weight along the ground and over the tops of houses.
Okay, that there is such a, for me at least, there is such a suspense of disbelief that has to happen that, like, I don't even know if I could even accept that. Like, dude, the winds, they were clearly just they were clearly just winds that were moving in just the right direction, right? Like, they were clearly just like, man, that wind knew where everybody's home was. That is wild.
Apparently the incident was covered up because the balloon smashed a few windows and greenhouses on its journey. This again doesn't feel like a satisfying explanation to me. I don't see how a weight being dragged along the ground creates such regular footprint shapes. Plus, none of the reports from the Devil's Footprint incident mentions any broken windows or greenhouses, so it's possible that this was a separate incident entirely. We don't have a single debunk that convincingly explains all aspects of the phenomena: the continuous trail, the single footstep, it crossing roofs and walls, the sheer distance of travel involved. So it's understandable why the supernatural interpretation remains compelling to this day. After all, Devon is a particularly strange and intriguing corner of England. It's a land steeped in mystery and ancient superstitions.
I like to zoom
out,
yeah.
It's full of stories of imps, elves, devils, all of them causing misfortune for travellers, and these stories have been told there for centuries. In South Devon, there's Dartmoor. It's a rugged landscape, widely considered to be one of Britain's most folklore-rich places. Its mist-covered hills and ancient stone circles have long inspired creepy tales about black spectral dogs, ghostly soldier processions, and of course, encounters with the devil.
My God!
Check out my Hairy Hands of Dartmoor video if you want to hear more weird stories from this place. But let's just say that if there was anywhere in Britain where you'd expect to witness the devil himself hopping across people's roofs on one leg,
I agree, it would be Rotherham.
Devon would likely be the place that it happened.
Rotherham is
the thing that
interesting.
I find most interesting about this story is that these weren't stupid people. I think when you hear that it happened in 1855, it's easy to assume these people were just superstitious and uneducated, but this was Victorian Britain, a time of steam trains, industry and scientific inquiry. These weren't medieval peasants who just attributed every strange thing to demonic forces. From examining the accounts from this period, it's not even clear that most of the locals genuinely believed that the footprints were the work of the devil. Some people did think that it was the devil, but the majority seemed uncertain about what had left the markings.
Right.
They spotted prints that didn't match anything that they'd ever seen before, prints that appeared in strange places and crossed distances that seemed impossible, and became alarmed at the prospect of some unknown creature stalking their villages. What that creature actually was, well, that remains a mystery. And on a side note, if you did want to see the devil's footprints, then there are many places around the world where you can do that. Britain itself has dozens of these places. Most often it's a rock or a cobblestone or the floor of a church where the strange indentation of a human foot or a cloven hoof has appeared. These places usually have colourful legends attached to them. For example, St Mary's Church in Usington, Kent, they have the Devil's Stone. The story goes that one day the devil decided to steal the church bells. He went up to the top of the church tower and grabbed the bells and then leapt down to the ground. He landed with such force that he left the mark of his foot in one of the stones that made up the corner of the church. This stone was later relocated to somewhere outside the church and can still be seen today, bearing the devil's footprint.
I mean, I'm sure that there's actual, chemical reasons something like that could happen, right? I mean, it's definitely odd. I mean, it's not, I don't know. I guess it's not dissimilar to what humans finding faces and things. But I mean, that clearly looks like, a boot, right? The underside of a shoe, something, right? Humans have a very good ability to find patterns in things. So some things, which leads to a lot of miscommunication, and leads to a lot of speculation, right? I mean, when it's clearly something like that, that's a little different. But even then, there's some things that really do look like faces and like pizza and stuff. It's so interesting how our brains work.
One of the creepiest ones I've heard of is the altar stone of Hood Hill in Sutton Bank. According to the legend, this rock used to be a druid altar. One day the devil stood atop the stone and his infernal heat melted his foot into the rock.
Right.
He flew out over Hood Hill with the rock still stuck to his foot, but eventually he managed to get it free and it fell to the ground and embedded itself in the earth. The stone remained in the ground with the footsteps still visible for centuries. Now, the creepy thing about this is you can't see this rock anymore. In September of 1954, an RAF pilot named Colin Grabham was flying a Sabre jet over Hood Hill. As he passed over the top of the altar stone, he suddenly lost control of his plane and it nosedived vertically into the stone itself. He was killed instantly and the stone was destroyed. Nobody ever figured out the reason for the crash. And
that's actually kind of wild, though. I mean, I'm sure there's a number of aviation specialists who could go into, because you can actually, I'm sure, go back in time at least to this era and just be like, okay, what was the wind that day? What was the weather? Because, there are certain, weather, air temperature, air pressure, that all affects things like that. If certain environmental factors happen on a certain day, you have to fly higher. I'm sure you have to fly lower in certain instances as well. There's so much that goes into these things. It's like I have no desire to pilot. I'll watch other people do it. I'll be interested in it, but I have zero zero desire to pilot a plane. I'm good. There's so much and so much that could go wrong. That is definitely interesting though. Or I mean, obviously, if we take the I guess a more realistic and grounded approach. I mean, just the stone ended up getting smashed, or the stone just I don't know, went missing or whatever. It depends on when because they would have to go to the area, right? The area where it's at. I'm certain that it's hard to say because I'm certain there'd be footage of this, but then again, this is in a time when CCTV wasn't necessarily a thing. Like, yes, sure, like film existed, but like to the extent we have now, I think that's a stretch. I don't know. That's definitely interesting, and I feel like that yeah, that definitely fuels speculation. But of course, as always, it seems blame the druids for some reason, I guess, because I don't know, the druids are not like us, and therefore we must blame the druids because people. That's just the rhetoric they default to.
Today, at the place where the altar stone once stood, there's only a crater with a small piece of the stone at the bottom.
Okay.
That hasn't got much to do with the Dorset story. It's just something I found whilst I was researching it.
That's actually really cool.
I thought it was interesting, so I thought I'd share it with you. Thank you for watching the video. I hope you found it interesting. As always, thank you to the patrons. I really appreciate the help. Thank you very much. If you want more weird stories from this part of the world, then check out my hairy hands video. That's definitely a strange story. Check it out. Until next time, goodbye.
I'll have to check it out. I actually very much have been loving Shrouded Hand's content. I ended up watching their video on the Antwalkers of Hiroshima, which I feel that as a subject should be very much required for people, who are in the field of nuclear weaponry, just to understand, to have that like understanding of the effects of that. I've watched a couple of other of his videos as well. His concentration camp video? I don't remember which one it was. The one with the stairway of the granite staircase. I can't remember enough about it. It was worse than Auschwitz. Even though Auschwitz was still pretty rough. Not a good time, definitely. But thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, Shrouded Hand, for just putting together some awesome content. I feel like we definitely had some fun in this one. I felt like there were little jokes in this one, but this really was put together very, very well. And I definitely think that this is some quality content on YouTube. But I appreciate all of you. As always, in the description down below, you will find all the information in order to find Shrouded Hand and this video. And I will see you all in the next one.